And so how do you integrate spiritual practices with evidence-based approaches to mental health?
Yeah, and I really resonate with the point you made, and I think for me, it also just comes down to some level of humility, because there are phenomena that are happening literally moment to moment that we have no idea how it's being done, right? I mean, if you look at our body, for instance, 50 to 100 trillion cells, and within those cells, 50 to 100 trillion, roughly, atoms, and they're all synchronized. They're all moving in a concert. I mean, the complexity is unbelievable, I mean, you can't even in your mind really rationalize a billion, let alone 100 trillion times two,
Yeah.
And then we very casually will sit here and take for granted the fact that we're on a big rock spinning at 1,000 miles an hour, rotating around this big, huge ball of fire, hurtling through this nothingness, right? And just say, oh, we understand everything. And so I think for me, having a math physics background, it was coming to the conclusion that there are things that are, like you said, happening that are so far beyond our ability to rationalize that we should be open to the idea of, there being some things that we, can't draw on the chalkboard, for example, And then how to kind of integrate that? Well, I think once you've maybe convinced yourself enough that you should have some humility around the way things work, I think things start to open up. And there's this physicist whose work I really like. His name's Nassim Haramein, and he gives this talk that he's given all over the world, and he talks about this idea of this field, and it has information, it has energy in it, and it's really technical. And then at the end, he asks the audience for questions, and in one of them, one of the guests says, "Well, so what? Okay, so what?" He's like, "The so what is, there's a voice, there is an intuition in us, there is something that is different than our rational mind that we can tune into if we have the humility to believe that it's there, and we practice trying to be still enough to hear it, right?" So I think for me personally, and I think for many, one of the foundational practices is meditation. And we don't understand all the mechanics of it, but something very significant happens when you practice being in the present moment more. And we can talk more detail about it, but I mean, you can measure this on an fMRI, with a brain scan. When your presence is in the now versus where for most people it is almost all day, telling stories, judging, making sense of, reflecting, there's something really special that happens when you spend more time in that nowness that we're just now beginning to begin to understand.
Yeah, and I'm really excited to kind of dive into that a lot deeper with you today. And so you talk in terms of mindfulness, meditation. You're coming out of a history where you battled with depression and PTSD. What sparked your interest in psychedelics as a tool for healing?
Yeah, it was really that I was at a bit of a rock bottom, And there's this, the famous poet Rumi. There's a saying or a piece of wisdom that he writes. Basically, when you're on your knees is a good time to pray. So when you're at that rock bottom, sometimes there's some opportunity, and I think that when I was in grad school, that was where I was, and I felt like I had tried everything else, and I started with meditation, and then kind of through that network was introduced to people that had used these plants in a more scientific way, a more structured way that felt more approachable for me and where I was. I was just wanting to feel better and had felt like I had tried a bunch of different traditional approaches and looking for something different, that wasn't just another pharmaceutical drug that I had, I had lost a lot of faith in the existing system.
Like a lot of us.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look at this, it's terrible, and I don't think that, nothing, no matter how bad, would justify it, but it is a signal of the trends. I mean, the United Healthcare CEO assassination in New York City in the middle of the day, and then you look at the response from the public I mean, we're really at a breaking point, you know? I mean, people are just completely fed up with the entire system. So it's certainly time for us to look for other ways to help people.
And psychedelics, I'm in Oregon where it has been legalized for therapy. It's still illegal in I assume still illegal in the remaining 49 states. But there's a growing interest in it. There's a growing research behind it. I grew up in the 60s and the 70s where, you know, it was more the stoners were doing their shrooms and that kind of stuff. And so I think a lot of people, a lot of our listeners and viewers probably have that image of psychedelics. Can you share a little bit more of this growing research in the benefits of psychedelics and maybe share some of the most compelling findings that you've come across?
Yeah. And you're right. Oregon is the first state where it's legal. Colorado just became legal with a similar framework to Oregon. And it does feel like it's changed dramatically over the last few years. And now on our programs, for instance, we have, you know, mostly well people that are looking to improve empathy, become more creative, develop better habits, become more connected spiritually, make change, process grief. So we actually screen out more severe indication. But yeah, the research is certainly growing. You know, it looks the research on the clinical end of the spectrum around PTSD, treatment-resistant depression, you know, looks incredibly promising for psychedelics. You know, particularly relative to SSRIs or some of our more common interventions. But they're not for everyone, and they're not for everything, and they're not without risk. The body of evidence continues to grow that for some things and some desired outcomes, there's incredible potential here. And I think that what we're learning too is that, again, the Western framework is very based on pharmacology. So it's just take this drug, go on your day, it's going to do what it needs to do without your buy-in or, you know, anything. I think psychedelics are a bit different, and to do them in the right way requires intentionality and requires some buy-in from the individual. And so, you know, PAT, psychedelic-assisted therapy, is not just, it's called PAT for a reason. It's not just psychedelic, it's the therapy portion. So the compounds have some way of opening things up, but then there is some requirement to actually do something with it. You know, if you just take the drug and go on with your day, you know, I think the consensus is that the results and benefits are probably quite limited. If you take the compound in the proper way and do the right things before and the right things after, it looks like you can really lay in some new neural pathways and some new patterning in the central nervous system.
And psychedelics have really been around for millennia, haven't they, in regards to practices spiritually and in healing?
Yeah, it's really fascinating. There's communities, you know, in Central America, South America, really anywhere you look. If you go back far enough, you can find some psychedelic use. There's some who believe that, you know, even early days of Christianity, you know, there was psychedelic use, and some of these experiences that people were having that they were describing as godly were because they were using these psychoactive plants. And so, yeah, they've been used for thousands of years. In some of these communities, they've been used without pause. If you look at the Huichol in Mexico, for instance. And so that's another reason why, you know, I think that there's some real validity into studying them more as potential treatments, because we have this long history of use, you know, where we can be quite confident that they're, you know, non-toxic, you know, where when you develop a new compound and you start giving it to people that's never existed in nature, you know, there's going to be a lot more risk to what that might do in 20 years, you know. But with these natural plants that have had use all over the world for so long, you know, I think you can make an argument that the relative risk is actually much, much lower.
So for those that are new to the topic, what does the responsible and safe approach to using psychedelics look like?